Welcome to another episode of Is It Finally Worth Playing? This is a series where I review games with troubled launches after months or years of patches, updates, and price drops. Let's start with the patches. Forspoken had serious performance issues at launch, often dipping as low as 20 frames in both quality and ray trace mode. For the most part, the latest patch has resolved this issue and made a few visual and quality of life improvements as well. There are still the occasional dips, but the vast majority of the performance issues seem to have been fixed. Every option for the most part hits and maintains its target frame rate. With that out of the way, let's start with the bad as always for full transparency. Once I was fully introduced to the open world, I immediately realized two things. The majority of the side content present here is low quality, and the map is massive. This brings me to this game's biggest problem. The open world here is unnecessarily big. You spend a lot of time traveling between objectives, and the majority of the side quests and mini games you'll encounter along the way, called detours, were severely lacking when it came to gameplay. Most of them just had you doing simple, mundane, boring tasks, like following a cat, taking pictures, dancing, or feeding animals. What makes this even worse is some of these are just straight up cutscenes with no gameplay. The story attached to a few of these side quests was surprisingly good, but the actual gameplay present in all of them was either disappointing or non-existent. To me, it felt like they were desperately trying to fill out all the dead space on the map. I feel like this also hindered the story pacing and game design for me at times because the map feels like a soulless obstacle course littered with wildly inconsistent side content that slides in and out of sync with the rest of the game. While I did enjoy the combat and traversal related side content, aside from the light banter between the two leads, none of it had any real story attached to it, and they recycled one location for every labyrinth in the game. They slightly remixed the layout and changed the color scheme depending on the location, but it's the same interior. I think this game would have been better suited as a smaller, more story-focused experience. The massive open world's main purpose here is to bloat out the game's length, and with Sepal being the only city in the game, and all of the main plot progressing there, it feels borderline worthless and barren. Aside from the break storms, there really isn't anything special about this open world, and the only other positive I can really say about it is the fact that you have a large playground to do the traversal in. But honestly, they should have just condensed it down. My second biggest issue with this game is the pacing felt off. You spend too much time with the starting spells and abilities, and the early game desperately needed some of the spells and abilities that are only available after a sizable investment into the main story. You are literally blocked from upgrading the traversal system early on for no real reason, and this is a perfect example of some of the bad design choices this game makes. It's like they intentionally made the early game platforming bad. The game would be so much better if it just gave you more sooner, especially with the first 6 to 7 hours being very rough around the edges and slower paced. It's weird how they drip feed you spells and abilities early on in the game only to bombard you with them mid to late game. On top of this, the game's presentation and overall image quality is still jarringly inconsistent in places, even after the patch. Numerous times during my playthrough, the game engine struggled to match the pre-rendered cutscenes. For example, I still notice issues with in-game lighting, shadows, and low-quality textures, and the pre-rendered cutscenes magnified all of this. You notice the stark drop in quality between the two. On top of this, I still encountered a few frame rate dips with certain enemy types, and this was weird because I didn't encounter this when the screen was filled with enemies and the action was kicked up. This didn't happen too often, but when it did, the dips were very noticeable and things slowed down drastically. I played on quality mode for this review. Alright, now let's transition into the good. I was really impressed with the story. It centers around Frey, an orphan from New York with a checkered past, that gets transported to the magical world of Athia. To my surprise, she is an interesting multi-layered character that is very relatable and realistically portrayed. Her lack of interest and reluctancy to become a hero were a welcome change of pace. I also really like how profane and crass she is. There are so many funny, memorable scenes because of her personality.
I have enough blood on my hands.
If not you, then who?
I don't give a shit. Just leave me the fuck alone.
You know I can't do that.
You created this, so I'll say it again. Cut the bullshit and let me the fuck out of here.
I will not accept the same fate as my sisters.
Ray! Finally!
Where the fuck have you been?
I will explain later. First, let's find a way out of this mad woman's nightmare. I just mean that even amongst the madness, there's a sort of delicate grace. Destruction and corruption are forms of creation in themselves.
Wow, you sound like a serial killer.
What?
Destruction and corruption are beautiful forms of creation in themselves.
I don't sound like that.
You absolutely sound like that.
Oh, no, you absolutely sound like that. Yeah, see? Two can play at that game.
You're fucking stupid.
Aside from the loop combat banter, I didn't have a problem with the dialogue here. They told a compelling story with unpredictable twists, good characters, and solid writing. I found myself laughing at a lot of the interactions between the two leads and being genuinely invested in the story. On top of this, there is also mountains of lore here to find, collect, and read. I know this is, basically subjective, but I really did enjoy the story, and it was definitely a high point of this game for me. Another big positive about this game is the combat and traversal system. These are easily the best things about this game. The combat takes a while to get used to, but it gradually gets better and better the more you play. The same can be said about the traversal. I was impressed with the variety present in both. I was also pleasantly surprised by the number of spells available and the size of the spell trees. Even though this is an action RPG, there is still a decent amount of depth to constructing your builds for your specific playstyle. Along with spells, you can equip 3 different types of upgradable gear: cloaks, necklaces, and nail designs. Each piece of gear has its own stats and different upgradable boosts that can be applied at the crafting table, like dealing more elemental damage to enemies or adding to your defense or health. You can upgrade spells by spending mana that you collect from the open world, and you can also pursue further upgrades through the spellcraft system. This system allows you to complete challenges to boost the stats and damage of individual spells. You also have the option to revert spells back to mana and abandon challenges. This all gives you plenty of room for blind experimentation. Now you can also upgrade certain aspects of your traversal ability through the spellcraft system, but I'm going to be honest, most of the main upgrades come from story progression, and they take a pretty sizable investment into the game before you see them. Now I want to say like things start to fall in place around 30%, but to be honest, you really need to get pretty deep into the game before you actually get quality traversal and platforming. And this leads me to my next point. The difference between the early game and mid to late game is massive. The improvements to the core gameplay drastically enhance the experience, and despite my earlier complaints, there are parts of this game I was visually impressed by. The unique art style, massive map, and break storms all look great. Especially the break storms, they were very well done. Each one created this ominous atmospheric experience that genuinely felt scary at times. The game really does find its footing towards the second half and is a lot more visually consistent than the first. I also like how they handle the difficulty here. This game can be as hard or as easy as you want to make it, with lots of accessibility options and in-game mechanics, like the ability to rest anywhere or revive yourself after falling in combat. Now both of these abilities only have 3 uses, but they both can be easily replenished at a refuge by simply resting or through the crafting station. I was actually surprised at how challenging the harder difficulties were here. Even with these options, a few bosses were very challenging, especially the last one, which was honestly frustratingly hard at times. I was also impressed with the size and length of this game. It took me 30 hours to complete the main story, and there was still tons of content that I skipped, and even then, after completing the main story and after the credits roll, there's still even more content. Despite its problems, I appreciate the originality of this game, and I really enjoyed the story. It's not perfect and definitely has a few cheesy lines, but overall it's very well written and relatable. I have my fingers crossed for a sequel. I think a lot of people wrote this game off before actually giving it a chance, myself included, but I'm going to give this a 7.8. This is the first time I'm actually fully recommending a game on this series. I got this for 17, so I would say try to find it for, $25 or less. I don't know if I could recommend this at full price, but to be honest, that goes for every game. I want to say 2 more things about this game before I wrap this video up. The first being that the late game break storms were just absolutely phenomenal. I played this game alongside Callisto Protocol, and I can honestly say I was never scared when I played Callisto Protocol, but the break storms in this game generally just freaked me out. There was this sense of terror and dread when you're like in the middle of the map, you're out of healing items and you're trying to make it to a refuge, and the sky starts to darken, and the storm starts to pick up. They just did an absolutely phenomenal job. And the second thing I want to talk about is how this game is a culture clash of a Western story with Japanese game design. The clash of the two make for a very unique experience that I think a lot of people weren't expecting. Admittedly, it's a double-edged sword because I believe this is where some of the game's issues stem from, along with the likely language barrier, but I still feel like it added something special to this game's design and overall charm. Well, hopefully y'all enjoyed the video, man. Like, comment, subscribe. I will definitely be back with another one. Peace.
Whoa. What the hell? What is this weird feeling?
There seems to be some sort of malignant miasma in the air.
Okay, turning back now.